As we've been walking around Shaftesbury the last couple of days, I've noticed quite a lot of beech nuts, and it looks like it's a mast year for beech trees. So often beech trees will produce lots and lots of empty nuts. This year it does look like they've produced nuts with actual kernels inside them. So this is what they look like, little triangular nuts. Quite difficult to actually pick because they lie flat on one side on the ground, and unless you've got long fingernails they're actually quite difficult to pick up off of a hard surface. A lot easier to pick up off of grass or soil. So I've picked a load of beech nuts. This is what they look like. I'm just going to eat this one now and tell you what it tastes like raw. So that's a beech nut, and it tastes kind of like you would expect a nut to taste like. Maybe a kind of halfway between walnut and hazelnut. Yeah. So quite tasty, but incredibly fiddly, and probably that's the reason why you don't really see people. Well, you certainly don't buy beech nuts in the shops, and you don't really hear much about people eating them. So anyway, I'm going to sit here and shell these beech nuts, and then we're going to try roasting some. They are fairly easy to shell just with fingernails, so just like pulling off these side pieces here. I'm not actually going to do it so in such a way that these sharp bits of shell will go under my fingernails. So it's not actually necessary to peel the edges off. You just kind of break these ridges and the sides come off the nutshell. But super fiddly for the amount of stuff you get. Now, beech nuts are much beloved by pigs, and in the New Forest near home for me, pigs are let out in the autumn to forage for acorns and beech nuts and other things like that. Pigs, of course, don't bother about whether they're peeled or not. They just eat the whole thing. They just snuffle them up and eat them with the shells on. Now, I don't know whether roasting them first might make them easier to peel. I feel like maybe it might make them harder. So anyway, I'm just going to sit here and peel my beech nuts. We'll roast some of them or toast them rather, in a pan. Give them a little bit of salt. See what their eating properties are like after they're toasted. In terms of the actual amount of nuts produced by a tree, they are tremendously productive. If you walk underneath a beech tree in autumn, this is about the middle of October, it's about the 10th of October I think, you'll find lots and lots of beech nuts on the ground. As I say, some years you'll find these little triangular shells, but they will have no nuts inside. Other years, this is one of those years, you get what's called a mast year, when the beech trees go all out and produce plump beech nuts such as this. So anyway, there we go. I've got about 8 of them in there. Right, camera off, and we'll come back when we've got more of these peeled. So as I'm sitting here shelling my beech nuts, I am being watched. So half an hour of shelling beech nuts gets you something like that. I would say it's probably barely possible to keep up with your own metabolism in terms of energy requirements. I think you probably could do it. I've got faster as I've gone along. In fact, what's happening here is I figured out what you do. What you have to do is just break all 3 ridges on the nut, and then the shell comes off with comparative ease. But it is cramp-inducing, fiddly work. Not something I would want to do all day. And I think you would have to do that for a couple of hours probably to get enough food to keep you going for a day. So I think it's possible probably to break even, or do better than break even, on the food value versus energy consumed acquiring it. But yeah, I wouldn't want to do this all the time. It's my hands, my thumbs especially, are starting to cramp a little bit. Now this one here is going to show you what I meant about what beech nuts are like in not such a good year. There's just nothing inside it. The tree has grown a shell, but there's no nut in there. And that's, in some years they're all like that. Other years, like this year, they're really nice and plump. Although interestingly, there's quite a lot of variance in the sizes and shapes of some of these nuts. Some of them are really broad and squat. Others are more slender. I don't think there's any way you could mechanize shelling the nuts either, because they're all just slightly different. The shell is very closely fitting to the kernel, and it's quite tough, and the nut is quite delicate. So I think if you tried to put this through any kind of roller process, you would just smash the nuts up. In the past, I think people have pressed beech nuts for their oil, which is probably a good way of getting the food value out of them, because you don't need to bother peeling them for that. But I think throughout most of human history, where beech nuts have been used for food, the way people have got food value out of them is feed them to pigs and eat the pigs. Now the birds and wildlife locally are quite canny actually, because there are places where these nuts have fallen onto the pavement and people have walked over them, or cars have driven over them, and that's shelled them, although it's broken them up. And you quite often see pigeons eating all the little pieces of broken beech nut that have been crushed out of their shells. Anyway, there we go. That's half an hour's work of shelling beech nuts, and I've already had enough. But what I'm going to do is just taste a few like that, see what they're like when they have a proper taste. Not especially tasty. Very mild flavour, nutty, texture like a firm walnut. I stand by my earlier judgment, kind of halfway between walnut and hazelnut. Anyway, I'm going to go and toast these now and see if they're any nicer when they're toasted. These are just going to go as they are, dry into a shallow pan. Probably should have blown those little bits of husk and stuff. It's just like a little bit of inner pith that they have, a bit like a chestnut. I think this might be one of these things where we'll hear the difference rather than see it. I think they will also benefit from a tiny little sprinkle of salt, which I'll add now, and then hopefully that'll stick to them. You just see some of them popping and cracking open, which I think probably means we're about done. They are only tiny, so they're not going to take much cooking. Yeah, you can see they're all cracking and popping open, which is interesting. And I think we're done. So that was only about 5 minutes of cooking. We'll let those cool off a little bit and then give them another taste. Right, there they are, toasted beech nuts. They're still warm, but not scalding hot anymore. Gonna give them a little taste now. Much, much better. Difficult to know what to compare that to. They are quite unique. Crisp, obviously nutty because they're like nuts, but they have a unique flavour all of their own. Sort of delicate, leafy aroma almost. Really good. So anyway, I'm going to let Jenny try a couple of these now, but I think most of these we'll save and use them as a garnish on top of an autumn casserole. So we've got these beech nuts, and I want to use them as a kind of garnish on something that feels a bit autumnal. So I've got butternut squash, parsnips, carrots, onions and tomatoes. Just going to chop that all up and roast it. In addition to all these vegetables, for the first stage of this, I've got these lovely, thick, dry cure smoked bacon rashers. I'll trim the rind off of those. And I'll cut them into little lardons and mix them in with the veg. You'll notice I'm using my pocket knife because there aren't any decent sharp knives in the drawer here at the cabin. And in fact, my pocket knife could probably do with a sharpen, but it's the next best thing. Righty, so nice thick smoked bacon lardons will go in there as well. Now there's not a lot of fat on that because it's back bacon. I will drape those bits of rind across the top when we cook it in the oven. But what that now needs is a bit of oil, just to help it along. Sweet paprika from my travelling herb kit. A little bit of salt, not too much because there is plenty of salt on that bacon. And then I'll just toss that again. Might have some dried herbs on there as well, dried mixed herbs. Just give that a good stir around so that it picks up all of those herbs and paprika and a little bit of salt. Gets coated in oil. Those pieces of bacon rind, just drape them across the top like that, and they will render out some of their fat into the veg. They might even go crispy. The cherry tomatoes I'm just going to plonk in there whole as they are. These larger plum tomatoes I'll just cut into 8. Put them over the top as well. Juice will come out of those and it will kind of stew these things, and then it will start to sizzle again. So that's all going to go in the oven now for half an hour, or until it looks like it's starting to soften and brown up and toast and go delicious. While those vegetables are roasting, or I suppose technically baking, I've got these lovely sausages which we got from the local butcher. 3 of them are herby, 3 of them are standard sort of butcher's pork sausages. Jenny prefers them without herbs. I like a nice herby sausage. And I'm going to cook these in a pan here. I'm going to fry them really slowly to get them to sort of caramelise and tenderise all the way through. And then we will use 2 each of those for the dish that we're making, and save 1 for the morning for sausage sandwich breakfast. So this lot's had 25 minutes now. I'm just going to check in on it. You can see the bacon fat, the rind has really crisped up. I might just take that out now. Little snack there, chef's privilege. I'll just give these a move around. Just make sure there's nothing sticking to the bottom of the tray, and give some of the bits at the bottom that haven't got any crispiness on them a chance to get a spot at the top. But it's looking pretty good. That's going to go back in the oven, I think, for about another 10 minutes. Meanwhile, just a tin of cannellini beans. This is just cannellini beans and water. There's no salt or anything in there. So the whole of this can, can you believe that? Oh, maybe it's one of these can openers that works that way. No, it's the can opener that doesn't work either way. There's another one we can try in the drawer here. Let's have a go with this and see if it's any better hope of getting... Oh, this one seems to work. Right. Good. The old butterfly can opener to the rescue. Right, now these are just beans in water, so I am going to put the water in there because it's got some of the bean essence in it. Aquafaba, they like to call it, don't they, people? But anyway, it saves me thickening things up again. To this, I'm just going to add a stock cube, a little small seasoning cube. Now at this point you might be screaming at the screen saying, you're making cassoulet, you're making cassoulet. Yeah, I'm making something that's kind of draws on some of the aspects of cassoulet, but here's why I'm not calling it cassoulet, because I'm going to put some ketchup in there. Because we're away from home, this is what I've got. So I'm just going to mix that up a little bit. Also in there we will have some more paprika. This is not smoked paprika, this is just sweet paprika. We will have some garlic powder. And yeah, if I'd claimed this was cassoulet, I'd have people telling me it's not authentic. If I don't mention cassoulet, I'll have people saying I stole the idea of cassoulet. So this is not cassoulet, it's something in the vicinity of cassoulet. Alright, those vegetables well, and bacon, have had that extra 10 minutes. Everything's looking really nice there. Got a nice little bit of browning on the corners, and the tomatoes have reduced down. Everything's gone a little bit sticky and kind of jammy. That lot now just comes into here. Now I won't throw that pan immediately in the wash. I'll put a bit of water in there, loosen up that, and we'll have this fond off of there as well. Because I think it will need a little bit of extra moisture just to keep it together. Deglaze this pan with a little bit of water from the kettle. Just going to let that sit for a minute just to loosen up all the tasty caramelised bits on there that we'll have. Okay, now the colour of this liquid will tell us whether that exercise was worthwhile. I'd say yes, it was. And then these sausages, I'm just going to place on top. They are 90% cooked. They just need a little bit longer, but this is all got to go in the oven anyway. So we will make use of that oven time to give the sausages the last little bit of cooking, and we'll put them on top so they get most of the heat. So that lot back into the oven for 10-15 minutes. Right, so there it is. Looking really nice and toasty and bubbling all over. The kind of not exactly star of the show, the beech nuts, are just going to be a kind of topping. I didn't want to put them in before now because they burn really easily. So these are just a bit of different texture. I'm going to put the whole lot in there. So that's my half an hour's worth of beech nut peeling. I'm going to let that sit for a little while just to let that rest, and because the dish is far too hot to handle at the moment. I'm just going to serve that with some lovely crispy jacket spuds. So let's get that to the table and give it a taste. It certainly looks autumnal to me. Jenny, these are your sausages, these three at this end. These are the herby ones at that end. Do help yourself. I will get a potato going. And this has got the beech nuts on top. So just a little bit of crunchy autumnal harvest in there. It's probably way too hot at the moment, so be careful. Well, I'm happy with the way that came out. I think the lighting's probably not that flattering, but we are where we are. I'm just going to taste a little bit of maybe butternut squash with some beech nuts on top. It tastes like autumn. It's verdict. Good?
Yeah, very nice.
It really is. Taste of October, doesn't it? So, there we go. That was my autumn vegetable cassoulet casserole thing with beech nuts. I hope it's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.